Hi there and welcome to the channel, and to this, the first wrap of 2025, in which I reflect on both the quality and the quantity of the books I read in January. Now, in terms of numbers, I read 12 books this month, which is pretty good, and in terms of quality, it was very high, as usual, given that I choose the books to read myself. So we begin with 5 more plays by Shakespeare. That brings to 12 the total I've read in the last 3 months or so. It takes me about 2 or 3 days to go through each one very carefully. So in January, the first one I read was this, The Merry Wives of Windsor, in this RSC paperback edition. Now, I'm not going to recommend this edition. It's printed on what looks like kitchen towel, so it doesn't take the pencil very well. And I don't like the way the notes are presented at the bottom of the page. I much prefer the ardent Shakespeare, but I did pick this up for just a few pennies. As for the play, it's something of a dud. It's so full of insulting terms from the period that you're constantly having to look up the notes and try and deduce what the characters are saying to one another. It's usually something highly disparaging, highly rude. The play itself does have a lot of funny moments in it. It's about Sir John Falstaff, who's down on his luck. He's broke, basically, and he's trying to sponge off 2 women with wealthy husbands, and he sends them messages telling them how much he loves them, but the women show the messages to one another and decide to have their revenge. And the play consists of them playing various pranks on Sir John, so he ends up inside a laundry basket, they dress him up in women's clothes, this kind of thing. And there's also some humour that comes from the accents. There's a Frenchman who speaks a preposterous English, and there's also a Welshman who's made a lot of fun of. But beyond that, just the difficulty of the language means this is something of a dud, unfortunately. The Merry Wives of Windsor, and I understand it's very rarely performed. Next, slightly better. It's All's Well That Ends Well, and this has a story which is taken from one of my favourite books, the Decameron, Day 3, Story 9, and it concerns a young woman. I can't remember her name offhand, I'm not great at remembering names, but she's from a poor family. Her father was a doctor and he's deceased, and she's been taken in by a rich woman who was one of her father's patients, and she cures the king, and because of this the king offers her anything that she wants, and she asks for the hand in marriage of this rich woman's son, Bertram. And Bertram is furious, and he does agree to get married because of the pressure from the king, but he refuses to consummate the marriage, and he runs away to Italy and joins an army and does some fighting. And basically his abandoned wife goes after him, and Bertram has kind of set down a condition upon which he will marry her, and he believes that these conditions can never be satisfied. However, she plays some tricks on him in Italy, and she does indeed win her man. The story is excellent. I recommend that you read it in the Decameron rather than read Shakespeare's dramatization. There is some good language in here, but on the whole, I didn't think it was as successful as Boccaccio's rendition. Next up, and we go to Greece, it's Timon of Athens. Now this play feels like it's half finished, unfortunately, and apparently there are indications that this is indeed the case, because there's a subplot involving one of my favourite historical figures, Alcibiades, and when he appeared I was like, great, what is he going to get up to? But unfortunately not a lot. And what this play does concern is Timon, and at the beginning he is a profligate and he's holding lots of crazy parties. They're like those big Hollywood parties that Elton John might have, with everyone enjoying lots of wine and debauchery. And he's also bestowing upon people lots of gifts. If you want a gift from Timon, a good tactic to use is to buy him a gift. Give it to him and then he'll top it. You know, you give him a gold cup, he'll give you 3 or 4 horses, whatever it is. And he's having a great time until the bill falls due, and his steward informs him that lots of creditors have arrived at his palace, and he's furious. Why didn't you tell me? I had no money left. And the steward says, well, I did try, but what are we going to do now? And Timon says, don't worry, I've got all these great friends who come to party all the time. I'll ask them to lend me some money. So he sends off some messengers. But of course, they all come back empty-handed. He's furious now. So he organizes a big party and invites everyone. And sure enough, they all show up again. But he serves bread and water and then kicks them all out of the house. And disgusted with humanity, retreats to a forest. He's searching for food and he digs in the ground and finds, would you believe it, a big pile of gold. So now he could, if he wishes, rejoin society and resume his lifestyle. But no, he's so fed up with humanity. He's so misanthropic now that he resolves to stay in the forest. Word gets round that he's now rich again. And so a procession of people arrive. There's a painter and a poet character who are most amusing because they will basically write anything about you in terms of poetry to flatter and get money, and the painter also will produce a wonderful, well, not really a likeness, but something that will again flatter the viewer in return, of course, for some hard cash. And then Alcibiades turns up, and then the leaders of Athens turn up too, and it kind of peters out with Timon just dying alone. So no, this one has its moments, but just was half finished, so we can't really give that full marks, can we? Okay, excuse me. Some green tea there. All right, next up is a successful play. It is Macbeth. Oh yes. Unfortunately, I was put off this almost for life by having to read it when I was at high school and not understanding a word of it. Banquo? What is banquo? What's a banquet? What's a castle? No, there was a castle in my town, so I was aware of what a castle was, but the rest of it was lost on me. But reading it in my 50s, I greatly enjoyed this. The gloom, the plotting, the ghosts, the madness, the witches, everything that we know is in here. You know, this one really does still circulate in the popular imagination, so there aren't really any surprises other than just how good it is. The language is amazing, and so I greatly enjoyed this, and Lady Macbeth is a wonderful villain. But the best of the 5 plays I've saved until the end, and it is Othello. And I would recommend for anyone who's looking to get into Shakespeare and wants a play that will start them off, this, of the 20 or so I've read of Shakespeare's plays, and I do intend to read all of them this year, this one is the best. It doesn't have a subplot, and it doesn't have that many characters, and you basically just follow Iago as he plots to destroy his master and Cassio. How it begins is like this. Iago is an ancient. He's a servant of Othello, who is a Moor, and he is a commander of the military forces. And he's passed over for a promotion for a man named Cassio. And so Iago vows to take revenge on Othello and Cassio. And that's pretty much what drives the entire play. But what's so wonderful are the characters. All of the main characters are superb. Othello, Iago, Roderigo, Cassio, and of course, Desdemona, who's fated to die at the hands of her jealous husband. The language in this is magnificent, and it is truly horrifying watching Iago go about his work. He never really shows any scruples whatsoever about just where he's directing Othello, basically towards destroying not only himself but everything around him, which in the end includes Iago himself. This is magnificent. Othello by Shakespeare. Okay, leaving Shakespeare behind, I then read a short book on Virgil. It's not in very good condition. I picked this up at a used bookstore, but no matter. It's an Oxford classic. Whenever I see this Oxford mark, and my wife knows it now, we buy them on site. And so this has a chapter about each of Virgil's 3 works. And while the Aeneid is very long, it's 12 books, the other 2 are very short. And I've got them here, and I'll be reading them in February. So we have the first up, the Georgics, the Georgics. And these are about agriculture. And apart from the delightful cover here. What really interested me in this is book 4 is all about beekeeping, and you do have numerous examples in literary works where the analogy between the society of bees and humankind is brought out, notably in Mandeville's The Fable of the Bees. Shakespeare also has a play where he devotes 10 or 12 lines or so to bee society, but in this one, Virgil goes at it for page after page after page, so I really enjoyed that with my interest in honeybees. So yes, this is all about supposedly being a good husbandman of the land. And then we also have the other poems by Virgil, the Eclogues, and this is perhaps most noteworthy for one of the Eclogues. I believe it's number 4, being seen as prefiguring the birth of Christ. And so this is a very celebrated work of poetry, and there were many early Christians who believed that Virgil should be seen as a kind of proto-Christian. So we have the Eclogues there, and so, as I said, this just gave me some valuable background on 3 of Virgil's works. Next, a novel that I've already reviewed for the channel. It's André Gide's Strait is the Gate from 1909. I wonder if I've encouraged any of you to track this down. Hopefully I have, and some of you will come and write some comments about how much you enjoyed this, because this was magnificent. A very, very sensitive piece of writing. And one thing I didn't mention in my review, in terms of the artistry of Gide, nothing seems to be left to chance. I counted up how many people die in this novel or during its course. One person arguably dies before the action begins, but they are mentioned at the start, and it's 5. And how many people are born? 6. And it's as if Gide just wants life to outweigh death, rather than have 5 and 5 there. So I believe that is also a touch by Gide. Everything here seems to have been done very deliberately, but without becoming mechanical or contrived. What a great writer. So perhaps you've got some other Gide recommendations you wish to share with me. Someone did note that The Counterfeiters is also great. Then some more French writing. It is Voltaire. This is also in terrible condition. I'm sorry, but I don't really care too much about the condition when the books are as cheap as this. And it is Zadig, has an excellent cover there. And another set of stories, L'Ingénu, the Ingénu. He's known as the child of nature in the English. And Zadig lives in Babylon, I guess in something like the 8th or 9th century AD. And he's a wise man. And he walks around basically trying to help people, but having all kinds of adventures and mishaps. And you can basically treat each chapter, and they're all very short, often just 3 or 4 pages or so, as a standalone story. But they do work in terms of a narrative that has some development, and it is basically, as I said, a series of mishaps with a happy ending. And he's such a lovable character. He's never really deterred by all the disasters his attempts to do good works create, and he encounters all the folly of the world without succumbing to melancholy, something that I myself am not so capable of doing. And it's very crisply written. It's very direct. It just gets on with things. So this was a real find. It's Voltaire's Zadig and the Ingénu. Okay, translated here it says by John Butt. Excellent Penguin classics. Then another classic here. It's St. Augustine's Confessions. This is beautifully written. This goes down very easily indeed. Sit down, open it, start reading, and then look up at the clock and like, wow, a few hours have passed and I'm on what, page 90? It's just a very fluent narrative, and it includes many famous episodes, such as in his boyhood, there's a whole sequence about him stealing some pears with a gang of boys he hangs out with, and he's still deep into middle age, kind of agonizing over the rights and wrongs of this theft, and he ponders at considerable length why he enjoyed stealing the pears. And so as he goes round each time, he's sort of investigating his psyche more and more deeply, and that is very pleasing because St. Augustine has a very probing mind. And then he goes on to his kind of sexual indiscretions as an adolescent and all the bad influences upon him, until finally he shrugs off the many faith that he's been involved with for many years and becomes a Catholic convert. I've just reached that point, page 90 or so. And of course, there's a lot in here about his mother, Monica, who he absolutely adores. And there's also, notably, going back to Virgil, a deliberate placing of his own story as being parallel to that of Aeneas. So whereas in book 4 of the Aeneid, Aeneas forsakes Dido and she sets fire to herself on the beach as Aeneas' ship is sailing away, and he looks back and sees these flames but doesn't know what's going on. So equally, Augustine doesn't have his mum set fire to herself, but he sneaks off, as Aeneas did, back to Rome, and he plays a trick on his mother, and she's there on the beach yelling, stamping her feet, where are you, where are you, you've gone without me. So that is quite amusing, the way he sets himself up as a second Aeneas. A very good book, St. Augustine's Confessions. Just a few more. Next, more French writing, and it is another novel by Marguerite Duras, and this time it's The Ravishing of Stein. And I had been planning to carry on my Duras series months ago, but the problem was, ladies and gentlemen, is her novels are very hit and miss, and I don't want to do a review of a mediocre novel just for the sake of completion. So I read one called The Vice Consul, and it just wasn't that good. So I've been waiting to find a better one, and now I have, because The Ravishing of Stein is excellent. Takes you right into the heart of a love triangle formed between Lol Stein and a man, a doctor, and Tatiana Karl, who's a childhood friend of Lol Stein. And I don't want to go too much into this. I'll save it for my review. But rather than being full of graphic descriptions of sex, what this novel is highly erotic. Now, as an Englishman, I am grinding my teeth even trying to pronounce the word erotic. But there we go. Our French cousins really do excel at this kind of thing. And so there's a sexual charge attached to this writing, which is very different to what I would usually read. But it is very successful. And technically, it's a real tour de force, because it keeps switching between points of view and thoughts as well, until you get to the point where you're so familiar with the different characters that even though in modernist fashion these who's speaking is kind of unmarked, who's thinking, you still know. And so you have one amazing chapter that is presented from the points of view of 3 different people and the thoughts of 3 different people, constantly switching, and you can follow all of it. And I thought, wow, that is really something. So yes, technically this was very satisfying. And I got to around page 120 or so of the 160, and all I was thinking was, if only they can supply some kind of ending to this novel, then it will have been a triumph. And the ending as it was something of a damp squib. But then I went back on what I'd said and thought, well, actually, it's still a great novel, even if the ending is weak. So I'll be reviewing that in February. Marguerite Duras. 2 more. Right, next we have some more Greek drama. So it's Aeschylus. I've been practicing how to pronounce it. I think that's close enough. With 4 of his 7 plays, although there is a question mark over whether he was the author of Prometheus Bound. Some people believe it was his son who wrote that. So we have Prometheus Bound. Yes, that one's great. Prometheus at the start is nailed to a rock as punishment by Zeus, presumably for eternity. But Prometheus remains defiant because he is in possession of a secret that Zeus will sooner or later have to come to him and ask him to disclose, and he is adamant that he will only do so upon condition of his freedom. And while he's chained to this rock, some visitors approach. So he has Oceanus, and then Io, and then Hermes. Yes, so he doesn't really give them, he gives some of them short shrift. He's rather like Timon of Athens in the forest, having these visitors that he doesn't really want. He's like, isn't it bad enough that I'm nailed to a rock for eternity, that I have to have people come and gawp at me as well? So there are some parallels there, actually. The idea of this defiant rebel. And Io's story is the most interesting. He has Io relate her progress so far, and then he foretells, because Prometheus has the gift of prophecy, he foretells the rest of Io's story. So you can compare his telling with that in Ovid's Metamorphoses and see how they line up. And also this acts as preparation for a reading of Shelley's Prometheus Unbound, which plays out like the imagined second part of Prometheus Bound, which was intended as a trilogy. And Shelley's poem, I understood much more what was going on after having read Aeschylus. Okay, then the next play is The Suppliants. Oh yes, this is good too. Great idea. It's about some of the Argives, and it's Io's descendants. They're in Egypt, and there are two brothers, and one has 50 daughters, and one has 50 sons. And I'm not sure which genius comes up with the idea, but the 50 sons come up with the wheeze of marrying their 50 cousins. But the cousins are horrified, and they take off from Egypt, and they kind of retrace Io's journey in reverse back to Argos, and there they are, the suppliants. They are praying to the gods of Argos to give them protection from their lusty cousins who are approaching in a ship. And so this play is about begging the current king of Argos to recognize them and support them, and he does agree to do so. But the heralds of the male cousins come on shore and try to drag the women away by their hair, and this king, Pelasgus, I think his name is, says no and draws his sword and then pulls the women into the city. This was also the first play in a trilogy, and just as in the case of Prometheus Bound, the other plays are lost. Then we had Seven Against Thebes. This picks up on Oedipus, right? I don't say Oedipus because I had a Greek professor who always said it like Oedipus with the emphasis that way around, so I follow him. He did know what he was talking about. It was Greek after all. And in this one, it's about trying to defend Thebes. But this is the house of Oedipus, not Oedipus himself. It's his sons, and they are Polynices and Eteocles. Yes, Eteocles is the good guy defending Thebes, and basically he ends up fighting his brother, and they kill one another in their fight, which is seen as fulfilling the curse that their father laid upon them. And the end of this play sets up the action that Sophocles will develop in Antigone, because you have the situation where the valiant brother who defended Thebes gets the proper burial, but Polynices is left outside the city gate to be devoured by the dogs, and Antigone insists that she will defy the state, rather like Prometheus, rather like Timon. There's a lot of rebellion in what I read this month. I'm not sure if there's any reason for that, but yes, it sets up the action for Sophocles' magnificent Antigone. And then the last play is about the Persians, who always get a very rough ride in Greek drama, don't they? No matter how many Persians show up, they always get defeated by a handful of Greeks. But I haven't actually finished that one yet. But Aeschylus, highly recommended. And finally, I read the first short story in this book, Italo Calvino, Under the Jaguar's Sun. And I said it the American way. People will be wondering why, but I lived in America so long. But if you're English, Under the Jaguar Sun. And this was an incomplete project left behind at the time of Calvino's death and seen through to publication by his wife. And there is a framing tale missing. But the basic idea was at least 5 stories about the senses, and it begins with taste. And then I'm not sure what the next one is because I've only read the first story, and they would have had touch and sight, etc. But as you can see from the cover, we have an Aztec pyramid. This is actually the one at Chichen Itza, which doesn't feature in the story. So the graphic designer kind of slipped up there. This first story is not his best work, in truth, but it did feel good just to be reading Calvino again. He was one of my earliest literary passions back in the early 1990s. So I'll finish that, but I just wanted to show you, I do have a whole bunch of his books here. I have all of these. I'll put them somewhere near the camera. So if you have a favorite Calvino title in here, you could pick one and I'll read it and review it for the channel. I think pretty much all of his major ones are there, and I've seen a few more in a used bookstore. I've seen 2 of the stories from our ancestors, and so you could add those to the list. The Baron in the Trees, The Non-Existent Knight. I can't remember the 3rd story from our ancestors. No, not offhand. Okay, that is everything that I read in January. Why don't you leave some comments about, well, what I read or what you read? What was your favourite book of the month? Because I'm about to choose my favourite book of the month, and it is, surprise, surprise, not really, it is Othello by William Shakespeare. I haven't watched any of the movies or theatrical productions of this, but I may do that in February too. But simply as a reading experience, I don't know if I'm alone in this, but I just love reading the plays for myself more than watching them. I'm just consumed with the richness of the language, and I don't find that it's all flying past before I can appreciate what is going on in these words, because there are just so many beautiful phrases. Let me just read one and then I'll sign off. But good lieutenant is your general wived. Most fortunately he hath achieved a maid that paragons description and wild fame, one that excels the quirks of blazoning pens, and in the essential vesture of creation does tire the engineer. Beautiful, right? So that is a description of Desdemona. I like this. Quirks of blazoning pens. Magnificent. If you don't know what a blazon is, it's a piece of prose or poetry where you set out all of the features of a woman and compare them to something. You know, so her eyes are like rubies. I guess no, that would be like a witch's eyes in Macbeth, wouldn't it? And your eyes are like diamonds, your lips are like rubies, your teeth are like coral. So that is blazoning. The quirks of blazoning pens. I'll leave it there. Okay, that's all for this video. I hope you've enjoyed it, but all that remains is for me to bid you farewell in the customary fashion. So until the next time, be safe, be strong, nanu nanu.